Today is June 9th, 2025, and my guest is mathematician and author Paulina Rowinska. Her book, which is our topic for today, is Mathematics, a Mathematician's Guide to Navigating the World. Paulina, welcome to EconTalk.
Hello, happy to be here.
Now, I should start by saying that I happen to be a map lover. I always have loved maps. I love different kinds of maps. I'm not a collector, but when I had more room in my life physically, I would save lots of maps that I just happen to love because I like the idea of having them. But I want to let listeners know that this is not going to be a discussion about just the kind of map that comes to mind when you hear that word. There's a little about that, and we'll talk about it. But what you mean, Paulina, by a map and what the rest of us mean by a map is not the same. So this is a very wide-ranging book across science, business, everyday life, medicine, and it's really about a map as a representation of reality and not what we normally think of as, say, a thing that you fold up that you used to keep in your car to help you find out where to go. Is that a fair summary?
Yes, there's definitely more to maps than I thought before writing the book. So there are very different types of maps, and how I think about the map and how also many mathematicians think about the map is a representation of reality. So kind of the model of reality. And it can be the map, although I don't know how many people still have the paper folded maps. I think this is, less and less popular way to use maps.
Yep.
Mostly on our phones, which is also a type of a map. But then we have like tube maps. I used to live in London, and like without the tube map, I would have been lost. So that's also a map, even though it doesn't look like one.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that. And for those of you not from London, a tube is a subway in London. I actually want to start with the old-fashioned kind of map, either the kind you might have had on the wall when you were in school. And you write something very beautiful. You say, whenever we open a map, we hold in our hands the results of centuries of mathematical research. And of course, you don't just mean the kind of maps that we hold in our hands, but the maps that we hold in our heads. And it's really a lovely way to think about it. But I want to start with the road map or a map on the wall. I don't think most people think that has anything to do with mathematics. They think, well, yeah, we kind of take a picture maybe from up above, and then we kind of, crop it. And of course, that is not the history of map making, even close. So talk about, as an introduction, some of the ways that mathematics had to be used to draw the maps that began many, many, many centuries ago. And then in modern times even.
Yeah, so mapping is complicated. Why? Because the Earth is not flat, and maps are flat in general. So, and this is a crucial problem. So in mathematics, there's a very interesting theorem that shows that when we try to take something from something like the Earth, so a sphere, onto a flat piece of paper, there will be problems. Something will be not working, something will be distorted, be distances or angles, and we cannot get around it. So this is the beauty of mathematics. If the theorem says so, we just can't get around it. And we still are making maps and they are still working. But by knowing that something has to be distorted, we can be more careful when we make maps and when we look at maps. So, for example, most of us are familiar with Mercator projection. So this is like I think still the most popular world map. And well, what's characteristic about it is the closer to the poles we get, the bigger the things look, the bigger the continents look. So, we have this massive Greenland, and then we have like tiny Africa. And I think most of us are aware that this maybe is not exactly how it is in the world, really. But honestly, I personally, even though I know this, every time I look at it, I don't realize how huge the difference is. And it's really skews our reality. And this is because of the mathematics. This is because of the way we project the globe onto a piece of paper. So I like to think about projections. So the kind of translating the three-dimensional globe onto a two-dimensional map. I like to think, imagine you have a transparent globe with, just the continents or whatever you want to translate drawn on them, and you put a light bulb inside of the globe. And you have a piece of paper, which will become your map. And, the shadows of the continents will be reflected on this piece of paper. But the question is, where do you put this piece of paper? Do you wrap it somehow around the map, like a cylinder? Around
the globe, yeah.
Or do you put it, just next to it? Do you put it further away? And this really changes dramatically what the map looks like. And and there's really beautiful mathematics behind it, and we can, write down equations or imagine mathematically what this map will look like and what will be distorted, what will be preserved. And again, what I want to stress is I'm not saying that like one of these ways is better than the other. That I know people hate Mercator map because they claim like racist, and because what it shows is basically the countries that are in the north, they're mostly richer and still more powerful, unfortunately. They are shown as bigger. And, the idea is that this map reinforces it. And it might, if we don't understand that is the mathematics behind it, because this Mercator's map, it's also very useful. It's made for navigation. So if we use it for navigation, still the maps we use for navigation in everyday life, so like Google Maps, are based on something similar to this map. So again, it's not that some of these projections are better than others. It's just we need to understand what they distort and what they keep and think, why are we making the map? What do we want to get out of this map? And choose the projection accordingly.
Yeah, if you're planning a trip across Greenland, you might want to use a different projection in terms of how much food you take or how many changes of clothing, depending on what method of transport you use. But I think it's a really beautiful image, this image of the globe casting a shadow. So if you wrap the piece of paper like a tube, like a cylinder around the equator, and you think about tracing the shadow that comes from the light bulb inside the globe, well, around the equator, you're going to be tracing basically the shapes of the countries. But as you move away from the equator, you can see very clearly that the shadow is going to be distorted, just like one's own shadow towards sunset starts to elongate. It's a fantastic image. How big is Greenland actually? Do you have a comparison that would help us understand that?
Yeah, so Greenland is still very big. It's the largest island in the world, okay? Don't get me wrong, it's still massive. But while it looks like the size of Africa on Mercator's map, I don't know the number. I wrote it in the book. I think it's like 14 times as smaller. You probably know better.
No, I don't. But it's a homework assignment for the listeners.
But the difference is just really huge.
Yeah, that's very cool. And of course, I don't think you wrote about this, but I didn't think about this until we just started talking. When you build a globe, you have to print the shapes of the countries and continents and oceans on a sphere, or it's a sphere, even though the Earth's not a sphere, but the globe is a sphere. It's an approximation. That's not so easy either, is it? Or did they do it locally in small chunks so that it's not distorted?
Yeah. So honestly, I'm not exactly sure how it's done now, but actually Mercator started, so the person who who created Mercator's map, he started like that. So he started from the opposite problem. He was making globes. And how they were making it, they were like making these kind of wedges, kind of drawing these wedges and kind of pasting them onto a globe. So it's kind of the opposite problem. And I think this inspired him to think in the opposite direction. And again, this is all math, because it's one of my favorite theorems of mathematics that we cannot really translate easily between dimensions, between different shapes, with different curvatures. That's the word that we should probably be using. And if it still sounds too abstract, making maps, like, honestly, have you ever tried to put a Band-Aid on your knee? It just doesn't stick. And have you ever seen a lollipop? It's not like the wrapping has all these wrinkles, and this is the exact same reason. So yeah, like once you see it everywhere.
I want to talk about coastlines. This is something I know a little bit about before I read your book, but you have a lot of rich description of it. This is not, I think, intuitive to most people. Neither is the map problem, by the way. I think if you ask people about projections versus a globe, a 3-dimension down to 2-dimension, they've heard of it, but they haven't really thought about it being a big problem. They just think, well, people are, it's an approximation, or the idea that it's a mathematical truth is not intuitive to non-mathematicians. And similarly, what I'm going to say next is really unintuitive. And that is that the coastline of England is as long as you want it to be, as opposed to a number. I mean, surely the coastline of England, the perimeter of, let's say, the United Kingdom, more accurately than England, the perimeter of the United Kingdom is it's a number, whatever it is. You just go out and you might have to take like a bicycle wheel with a stick, and you'd roll around to whatever, or you'd take a ruler. I mean, obviously we know how to measure that, right? And yet, that's not a well-defined problem. And that is shocking, I think, when you first hear it. And at first, I think you think, oh, this is just obviously a trick. But it's not a trick. So I thought, use a beautiful example, and I think it's the same point, about measuring a table with a fixed stick of a certain dimension. And that helped me see it in one way of seeing it. So use whatever you want. Talk about why is it hard to come up with an accurate measure of a country's coastline?
So just first of all, you said it's not intuitive for non-mathematicians. It's also not intuitive for mathematicians. So I think that's the thing about mathematics. Like sometimes the results are not intuitive. And as I said, I'm like, what do you mean we cannot measure coastline, right? Like it just feels wrong. And so the point when we measure a table, when we measure a straight, smooth line, we know how to do it, all right? Like we even if we don't have like a ruler, if we have a stick that we know the length of, we can just like put it one after the other and kind of approximate, it's between 5 sticks and 6 sticks, and we know more or less what it is. And for many shapes, we can do that. And that's kind of how we do it with coastlines. Obviously, nobody takes these days like a stick and goes around England, but the idea is similar. The problem is that if the stick is very long, we are missing many of the irregularities, like there are some, especially the beautiful parts of the coastline with all the cliffs and all the, inlets and bays and all this peninsula, we are missing them. So we take a shorter stick and we are capturing way more, but we are still missing some. And, the shorter the stick is, the more we are capturing. And, it's kind of the same thing as, depending on what scale of the map we are using. If we try to measure the coast of United Kingdom using like just a word map, there are not many details there. Like it's not gonna be very long. But if we look at, very detailed map, large scale map of the United Kingdom, we have way more details. So we are capturing them. And the number grows and grows and grows. So it should convert for a normal, like regular shape, it should converge to the actual number. There is one. Here, there's none. Now, does it mean that all the, comparing different countries and their like borders or coastlines is meaningless? No, it's not. Because if we agree on the way and the scale of the map we are using, we can make meaningful comparisons. But unfortunately, different agencies, different countries, they use different methods. There's no like agreement. And then we can just claim whatever we want. And I'm sure you've seen, some people say that the Nile is the longest. Some people say that the Amazon River is the longest. And obviously there are other issues. Sometimes we don't know where the river really starts, etc. But one of the issues is it really depends how we measure it.
So I want to say something again for listeners who are hearing this for the first time. It's a coastline in a real world country is by definition not a straight line. A coastline, that there are other borders that could be either a straight line or close to it. We'll talk about those in a minute. But a coastline from space, from outer space, from a satellite, has a certain shape. And if you take that picture from outer space, obviously you have to control for the fact that you're far away. But if you're walking on the beach, the ins and outs at the granular, to use a bad phrase, sandy level, but by granular I mean small, there's as much detail as you could possibly imagine, which is to say that in some sense, if you think of a crude coastline that stretches for, let's just say, a mile, and it's pretty straight. So if you just pretend that it's straight, you get some measure. But if you wanted to do better than that and be more accurate, and you tried to follow each little tiny turn and bend, you start to realize that there's an immense amount of possible space in that bending. I guess one way to help listeners think about it is you're inside your body. Your intestine should be, I don't know what, a foot and a half long. I mean, how long could it be? But of course, the thinner it is, and the more it's turned back and forth on itself, and if you start to say that the turns can be close to infinitely small, which would be true if you were down on your knees with a magnifying glass trying to figure out the coast, you can make it as long, pretty much as long as you want. You can squeeze a lot of distance in there. Is that what's going on?
Yes, and what I like to think about is sometimes, when you go hiking and someone asks you, like you're trying to estimate a distance, in a straight line, like straight line distance is usually very short. It's like, oh, in half an hour we'll be there. But then it takes you 6 hours because you have to like go around. Or, if you've ever driven in like a place when there are many mountains and the road is like really goes back and forth, you did not expect that sometimes if you use like a smaller scale map. It's like, okay, we are almost there, but actually you have to go back and forth. And that's exactly what's happening.
And you gave the example of shared borders of countries are measured, they have different lengths if they're coastline, if the borders are not straight.
So, I mean, that's how the person who actually like looked at it the first time, Richardson, he looked at, I think it was Portugal and Spain, the border, and he's like, wait a minute, why isn't the border the same length? Like it's the same line, and it's just the countries measured it differently. And I think we are getting better at it. It's much harder now to find these like extreme differences because just countries are agreeing a bit more, and it's usually like one big agency. But I still managed to find some meaningful differences. And just to make it clear, when we talk about differences, it's not that, the difference like, oh, one country is like 100 kilometers more. It's more like it's double the number or triple that.
Yeah, the number you report is Portugal and Spain share a border, and Portugal says it's the length of that border is this. I don't know if this is when this was done, but it was 1,214 kilometers, and Spain thought it was 987. That's a massive. It's not like it's almost a whole percent. No, it's more like 25% is approximation of what kind of error. It's a terrible error, and it's not an error. It's just a different methodology, I assume, for calculating the distance.
Yeah, it's not an error. Like both numbers are correct in some way.
Which is crazy. The last example I want to take of this, which is entertaining mainly for the footnote, but there's a lot of good footnotes in this book. This is I think it's my favorite. So if you look at Colorado, the state in America, it's a rectangle. It's got four sides, and they're all straight lines, and it looks like they're 90-degree angles, roughly, for the corners. And then you start to think, well, wait a minute, it's not really 90 degrees exactly because it's curved, and the curvature of the Earth's different up by the northern border than the southern border. Okay. That's going to make it a little complicated. But it's more complicated than that. You claim that Colorado has 697 sides. That's more than four. How is that possible?
And it is possible because the line drawn on the map was straight. But then you have people, and remember we are talking like a few centuries ago when the technology was very different, and you had people actually going out there in the land and like marking the border. And, first of all, people make errors. Like it's, impossible to do it in a straight line. But then, I don't know, you have a little pond that like you have to go around, or you have, a little forest, whatever this is. And these are very small differences. Like you really have to have a large scale map to see them. So you have to like zoom in. So they did a really good job, actually. Like it is approximately a rectangle minus the curvature. But it is interesting that something we assume these are straight lines. That's it. In the real world, they are not exactly straight lines. And this we are talking about place that didn't have like many rivers or anything like that. So imagine in a jungle, like it's impossible to draw a straight line.
Yeah. So I got out. Actually, I typically use Google Maps on my phone, but I went and used Apple Maps. Apple Maps actually gives you a globe when you ask for a country. It doesn't just give you a projection on a flat surface. It tries to give a 3D representation on a flat surface. I don't even want to start with what's wrong with that or some distortions, but it looks real. It looks like it's well done. And if you start to look closely and enlarge it, pinch it out with your fingers, you see that, oh my gosh, down there in the south, it isn't straight. If you look closely, it's starting to go down a bit. What happened there? And the answer is it's not straight. So it has 697 sides, and this is the footnote that I loved. There's a name for that. Is there really? Did you make this up, Paulina? Is this true?
No, I put a source in there. This is not my right. I think I saw it in. I think it was Atlas Obscura that reported on that for the first time. So credit goes to them. But I was like, I need to put this in this book. And there is a name, and don't ask me to pronounce this name right now. But there's a name for this shape, which is completely useless. But
it's not. No, it's great for parties or EconTalk trivia contest. So I'm going to pronounce it. I'm sure I'm going to pronounce it incorrectly, almost by definition, right? It's a hexa hecta anacontaka e heptagon.
Well done.
That might be 698 size, but according to if I pronounced it correctly, it's 697. Let's talk about subway maps. Utterly fascinating. What did they used to look like in London, and who had this insight of how to make them less accurate, and more useful?
Yes. So when the transportation started in London public transportation in London or in any city, you have like a few lines, a few stations. It's very simple. So you can easily put it on, you take a geographical map of London and you put these stations there and everyone is happy. But the more complicated the system becomes, now London has huge system. You can go, from one side to the other. You can spend hours on the tube. And then it became so complicated because the lines are not straight. They just go around and turn and curve. And people were afraid to use public transport because they were like, oh my gosh, I'm going to get lost. I don't know how to do that. And Henry Beck, who was not a map maker, he was, draftsman for some engineering company, but in his free time, he was like, what if we did with the map, with the tube map, something like that engineers do with electrical circuits. So a map that forgets about the geography, but only focuses on the stations and the connections between them. Because in the end of the day, that's what we use public transportation maps for. We are not the ones driving the bus or the tube. We just need to know which station where to take the line, which line to take, where to get off, and that's the important bit. So today, the map, obviously, this is not the map that Henry Beck drew. But it's a similar idea. And he was not the first to come up with this idea. He just became the most famous. And, there are other cities where the maps look like that. And now we have this iconic tube map with straight lines. So they're all like vertical, horizontal, or diagonal. The distances between stations, they all look, or most of them look, they're equal, which is not true at all. And I've made this mistake of assuming that, this is the same distance, like it's just a short walk. No, some tube stations are just like 3-minute walk away, and some are like 40-minute walk away, but they look the same because otherwise it just becomes so complicated that nobody would ever use this map, because why would you? So many cities all over the world, like I live in Boston area now, and it's the same thing here. The map is not geographical because why would it be? It just serves a different purpose. So we call this map topological, and topology is a very weird area of mathematics. I would say it only looks at connections within shapes, but it doesn't really care about the exact shape. So, a circle and a square for topologies is the same thing, because you just can squeeze it and, just elongate it. So as long as you don't make any holes in it, you're fine. So that's why we call it a topological map, because that's what it is. It cares about connections and order of the stations rather than the exact shapes.
And what's interesting, of course, is that you can't superimpose the subway map or the tube map on the geographical map. It literally doesn't fit, which is on purpose, because if it did fit, you'd need either a much bigger map, and I don't think you mentioned, you got to write the stations down. So it's not just it curves around, and it gets complicated because there's stations that have 5 different lines go through them, and the idea that you would print that on an actual map, well, it seems like a really good idea, except you can't read it because they're going to have to be so small. And it's just a fascinating example of the power of approximation. And, one of the themes of your book is that maps are simplifications. You can't you have to leave things out or they're not useful, because a map that had no simplifications wouldn't be a map. It'd be the real world and be too big to fold and put in your pocket. It's a different math result, right? The number of times you can fold a piece of paper.
Yes, and that's right. Like that's what maps are. And again, I keep coming back to this in this book. Why did I even write this book? Why it's important to understand, maybe not all the details of mathematics, but kind of the idea that every map maker makes a map for some purpose. So we need to know what this map is useful for, what it's not useful for, and what it's there, and what, I think this is the most important bit, what's missing. And again, I'm not saying that if something is missing in the map, it's a bad thing. Often it's a very good thing. Because we just need to have what is needed and what is crucial, and then the map is useful, but we need to be aware of that.
So I want to talk a little bit about delivery of packages. And so it's an old problem, mathematical problem. It goes back to, is it Euler? It's Euler, right? It's not Gauss. It's Euler. Gauss is in this book. Gauss and Euler are two of my favorite people. I'm not a mathematician, but I have a lot of love for both of them. And there's a classic problem. You've got to go to a bunch of different places, either delivering things or making sales calls. And what are the choices of how you can make that trip? Obviously, you don't want to spend an infinite amount of time. You want to economize on time. And you have this great number, which is, I think the average, not the average, but some drivers for UPS make 135 stops in the course of a day. Well, how many ways could you make 135 stops? Well, the answer is a lot. You say more than the stars in the universe, cells in the bodies of all human beings, trees on the earth put together. That's a lot of routes. So you don't want to, some are the worst, some are the best, but you don't need the best. That's another example of the kind of simplification we're talking about. You want a route that's, quote, good enough, that's close to the best, if possible. May not be, but it's not horribly long. So how does math play a role in that?
Yeah, so this is one of the extremely difficult problems, and one of the problems where the number of ways to do something grows very, very fast with the number of stops we are adding. So with 5 stops, if I'm a delivery driver and I have to make 5 stops, I have like 120 ways to do that. But then we grow very, very quickly to like numbers that we cannot even imagine. And bear in mind that every day the stops are different. So, today I order a package, tomorrow you order a package, and they need to figure out every morning how to do it fast. And if you've ever seen a delivery driver, they're really fast. They drive with like open doors. And so they jump out, throw the package and come back in, because that's what they are paid for. That's what UPS or DHL or Amazon or whatever, whichever drivers, companies, they pride themselves in, that they're fast. Now, so you need something fast, that every morning you get a route. You know exactly where to go, which way to go. And because there are so many ways to do that, the most powerful computer in the world will not be able to compute every morning all these routes and spit out the shortest one or the fastest one. Because this would take like centuries probably, which doesn't really make much sense. Now, we also don't want the driver to do like, first he goes to the furthest or she goes to the furthest place and then comes back here, and then it wouldn't make sense, right? Like if there are 2 stops next to each other, they probably should be served very close in time together. So you need a route that's good enough. And for that, we are using different algorithms. And actually, they're all secret these days. So Because this is what the company's success depends on, really. Like the faster they go, the more customers they can serve. And, it's all about fuel efficiency and the time. Like they have thousands upon thousands of delivery drivers and they have to pay all of them. And they probably should pay more to them. So, it's about efficiency. So we are creating algorithms, so kind of ways of figuring out the fastest, the most optimal route. Now, again, we cannot really find the fastest, but we have very good algorithms that make sure that the route is at least as good as X. So it won't be, it might be like 10% worse than the possibly fastest one. And, it's good enough as long as we can get a fast answer every morning. So yeah, that's again mathematics at its best. Like also real life mathematics, right? Because in theoretical mathematics, we love the answer, we love the best answer. But in everyday life, we are using different ways, different algorithms to figure out the good enough answers. And there are so many algorithms to do that, and they give different answers, but most of them give, some answer that's just okay.
I think you give an example in the book. A very crude algorithm or crude heuristic would be pick a stop and then go to the nearest stop to it. That's not a bad starting place for a heuristic or a rule of thumb. Presumably, FedEx, DHL, and UPS use some improvement on that. But in the example I think you gave, drivers develop a certain intuition. And if I remember correctly, a lot of these companies use some mix of math and driver experience or know-how to help design that route. Is that correct?
Yes. So again, I was trying to piece together some pieces of information I found because it's all top secret. But yes, there was UPS one day they decided we are going to make everything automatic. We are going to optimize that. They paid a lot of money, invested a lot of money, hired mathematicians or computer scientists to figure this out. And this was a big failure. It just didn't work. And then the drivers were like, wait, why are you, making us drive at 8 a.m. or 9 a.m. in the morning next to a school when there's like no way to drive? Like it doesn't make any sense, right? So they kind of know their area better. They know which turns are, more dangerous or take more time. And they just know what works, what doesn't. But also, we want to make it a bit more optimized. So kind of combining these to, the human experience, the human knowledge, and the human intuition and the mathematical insights. And it turns out that this gives the best results.
So some listeners may remember the interview, I think it was with Vernon Smith, where we're talking about Federal Express and Federal Express using it's called a hub and spoke system, but at the time there was only one hub and it was Memphis, Tennessee, and every package that FedEx picked up was taken to Memphis and then it was flown from Memphis that night to its destination. And everyone would always say to me when I would talk about this, obviously that's inefficient. Why would you make every package go to Memphis? I mean, if you're flying a package from Oakland, California to Berkeley, California, it's stupid to make it go all the way to Memphis. And then you start thinking about the fact, and this is a nice way to think about it. We thought about it differently when we talked about it before, but okay, so let's just use one plane. So let's go around to all the places that people are sending packages, and we'll just pick up all the packages, and then we'll take the plane and we'll drive it to all the places where the packages are going, and we'll deliver them. And not only would it take centuries to figure out what the best route was that night, but even that night, it would take a very, very, very long time. And so you need lots of planes. And so what Fred Smith understood is if you deliver and pick up in 40 cities, you can use 40 planes. It starts in a city. It picks up all the packages. They're all delivered to that airport by trucks. You fly it to Memphis. They're all distributed to the planes going back to where they came from. And you need 40 planes, which is a tiny, tiny number compared to if you're trying to minimize the distance that a package traveled. So it's an extraordinary, I mean, it's the same problem. It's exactly the same set of mathematical issues, I think. Tell me if I'm right.
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, I don't think even the details matter so much. Again, it's about how, also what are we minimizing? We are not minimizing only distance, right? Like we are minimizing the time, the efficiency, the cost. So every company needs to decide what's the priority and what's more important. And, like that's exactly also the point I'm trying to make is that mathematics, it's one thing on paper and one thing if we want to apply it. And it's okay if it's, we take mathematics and make a bit of an art out of it. We kind of take some results and leave other results. And so they suit our application.
I'm curious if in writing this book, this idea of simplification and leaving things out when you make a map, you said you start to see certain things everywhere. Did you start to see that in your own life? Did you notice the necessity of leaving out details at all? Or is there anything else you learned in writing a book about maps?
I mean, first of all, when I was writing the book, I had to make so many decisions about what to leave out and what to keep in. And honestly, it's harder than I thought it would be, because to do that, you really, really need to understand the problem. It's the easiest to give like all the details and, and keep the other ones. But I definitely like looking at infographics and any data visualizations. The most powerful are the ones that have the exact amount of information that the reader needs. And I remember listening, I think it was another podcast about, on the planes, we have these leaflets that tell us what to do in case of an emergency. And I didn't realize how much effort goes into creating them because you want people to be informed, but nobody will study, a whole book of all the details. And I actually like now looking at different planes, like how differently they look, and to see like what they put in, what they leave out, and like what's the most important thing. Because, again, like we are humans and there's only as much information we can keep and process. So the key is how to make us act. One another example that, is, I remember like 20 years ago at this point, I visited Germany and they are really good with recycling. But they were like, I swear, 20 different like trash bins to, brown glass, green glass, white glass. I was so confused. I came from a country that wasn't really recycling at that point. So I was just like standing in front of these trash bins and trying to figure out when to trash like my tea bag. And I'm pretty sure that since then, Germany decided to actually reduce the number of these different bins and, to actually increase efficiency, because if you are so confused, you're just gonna put everything into mixed recycling or like mixed bag, which won't get recycled in the end, right? And I don't know the exact details of how the recycling works there, but I think it's the same idea. It's we should serve humans and not try to be the smartest and try to be like the most efficient.
Yeah, it's a great example of the importance of imperfection, and the perfect is the enemy of the good. I have the same thing. You'll be in the airport, and there's 3 bins. There's not 20. There's 3, and there's another issue which you didn't mention, but it's obvious, is that not everybody speaks the same language. So you're going to use some kind of visual representation. And there's no tea bag on any of those bins. So if it's a tea bag, you're going to have to make a classification decision, and it's sometimes not obvious. And you find yourself throwing something away in one of the bins, or putting it in one of the bins. You have no idea whether you've done the right thing, the wrong thing. Should you have emptied the liquid? No one wants to read a 400-page book. No one will read a 400-page book about how to throw away trash, how to recycle or throw away something at the airport. So you've got to use some crude, imperfect system. And it's really a good metaphor for life, actually. I won't say anything more about it. If you can add anything to that if you want, but and listeners can fill in those blanks. But do you want to say anything else on that question of imperfect but useful?
One thing I've been learning, so this year I've been studying science journalism in grad school. And, writing the book, I had time. I really could take my time to go through everything and make it, it's not perfect, but as perfect as I could make it. Now we were learning to write science news. And, it's a whole different story, because you have news, and in 3 hours or in one day and maximum, you have to have a story out. And if I started to really look into every single detail and the best way to cover the story, and this is what I was doing in the beginning, don't get me wrong, I missed some deadlines. So this is another example, and both approaches are probably right, but it depends. If we just want to communicate news, we better be fast. If we want to write a beautiful feature story with, interesting characters, we can take our time. But that's really, I think good enough is good enough. And that's what maths and maps teach us as well.
It just reminds me of a lot of the debates that economists get into and others get into about rationality. I remember, I'm sure I talked about it in the episode I did. I think I did a couple with Gerd Gigerenzer, the German psychologist, and he talked about this perfect system for allocating patients to the emergency room. There were 15 variables. The doctors had to give a score to all 15 variables and then use a pocket calculator to figure out whether to send somebody to the ICU. And not only was that system outperformed by the 3-step heuristic that he suggested or the doctors were using, but they're not even going to use that. So to call that the most efficient, it wasn't. But even if it were, the fact that people wouldn't use it means it's not the most efficient. So it forces you to start thinking differently about efficiency. I don't think you said much in this book about AI. When did the book come out originally?
So, it came out 2024, exactly a year ago, pretty much. But yeah, it was the
Dark Ages, yes. Medieval times, before BAI.
Yes. It's insane how much progress has been made in the last 2-3 years. I actually, I was writing the book, and without ChatGPT, I don't know how I did that,
It's a miracle.
And it's really crazy to see how the world has changed. And many people actually write in comments and reviews there's nothing about AI. And I'm like, well, and I'm not saying there was nothing happening. In fact, in my very last chapter, kind of outlook.
There's a little. There is.
Yeah, I wrote about, for example, self-driving cars.
We're going to come to that. Yeah.
Yeah. But, one part was the progress is just, I think 5 years ago, people knew that AI is a thing, but nobody was talking about it. Now it's the topic number one. And I'm not talking about in science, but just, you go on the street and people talk about AI. And also, there are so many things I left out because it's just one book and I just wrote, maybe there will be a sequel, that will be AI.
Sure.
Notes, but...
it's not a criticism.
Yeah.
but I have to make this bad joke, but the book was written BC, before Claude. Sorry about that. So I'm not criticizing you for not having anything about AI in the book, but what I'm interested in is what thoughts you might have on AI in terms of both map making and mathematics. There are people who are saying now that, mathematics it's not going to be a field because AI can do everything, can prove everything. It's going to prove every conjecture faster than human beings. Now, I'm skeptical about some of that, but it is going to have an impact on mathematics, and it's certainly going to have an impact on applied mathematics, which is what we're talking about. I mean, we're talking about a mix of theory and applied. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, everything is in progress. So whenever I hear someone making like a definite statement about it, I'm like, all right, I mean, I guess you know better, but I don't know. My view is that I don't think mathematics will die out as a field, but it's going to change. And it's changing already. So, and kind of in the same way, that calculators changed the field, right? And so I think when you think, for example, about proving a big theorem, often it's a series of proving like mini theorems without it. Within it. So it's like many steps to get to this big chunk. And I think AI can do some of these steps, or will be able to do some of these steps that are kind of mechanical. I mean, they involve some creativity, but they are not don't require, the brightest minds. Now, what I think AI won't be able to do, at least for a long time, is to first of all figure out what these steps should be, and second, how they all fit together. And I think this is where human steps in to really have this, to really think out of the box, to think about how to prove it, how to figure it all out. And I think right now I think of AI as a very advanced calculator that can do way more than a calculator, but kind of to do the things that usually take more time than thought. And I might be wrong. It's getting more and more advanced. So I think it can prove more advanced things. It can think in a more advanced way. But I still think for at least some time and a long time, we'll need the mathematician to really, think about how to approach a problem, which problems are relevant as well, and what questions to ask. So I think still people will be in control for a while. But again, I might be very wrong. And, I also don't work actively in mathematical research right now. So, I might be missing something, but that's my feeling. If I had to bet my money, I would say AI is very helpful, will be very helpful, will be more and more involved. And I think it might become a bit like a calculator at some point, just that the mathematician won't spend time computing an integral, but it will spend time thinking how to use this integral.
I was thinking about, that's great. I was thinking about how people are talking about it compared to, say, 5 years ago. And I think we're just at the edge of that. There's so many things lately I've found it to be, it's useful, but it's more than useful. It's kind of fun. And it's kind of exciting that it can be done, and it's sort of marvelous in the old-fashioned sense of the word marvelous. It's a marvel. And I'm trying to find an analogy the way people talk about it. I think this is a terrible analogy, but I'm going to run it by and see what you think. It's like you're in a country and they don't have pizza. And then somebody opens a pizza place, and oh my gosh, I've never tasted anything. Like, you think about pizza, sushi is somewhat in this category. It's like, there's not a lot of things that are really like it. And when it comes to your country or your city or your town, the first time, it's like everyone's talking about it. Have you had that? Have you tried that pizza? and soon there's pizza shops everywhere. And of course, some of them are not very good, and some of them are better than others, and some are fantastic. And people want to try them all. I find myself trying I use Claude and I use ChatGPT, which I now call Claudette, because when I have a woman on Claudette talking to me, on ChatGPT talking to me, it's so exciting. Or maybe it's like a new kind of pet. You got a dog and a cat, and then somebody says, well, what about an ocelot? Oh, wow, see that guy had an ocelot? It was so cool. I don't know. It's something. People want to talk about it.
I think that's a part of it, but I also think that there is a bit, for example, like this image generation, like all social media people are generating images. Also, please don't do that, because this takes so much energy that this is like the worst thing for the planet. Just saying that. And it's exciting. Like I'm sometimes like, wow, it can do this, it can do that, and it's fun and exciting. But I think so. This is like the pizza part. But I think there's also it's really becoming a big part of our lives. So I'll probably compare it a bit more maybe to social media, something that in the beginning was like, oh, what is this Facebook thing, And now it just became like a thing, like if you're not on social media, you don't exist. Like news happen on social media,
right.
and everything happens there. So it became really just a big part of our lives. And I think this is what's happening with AI. But I also think there's one thing is like a regular user, it's all fun and it's just like fun and games. But then you have the research part and, the use of AI in medicine, for example. Yeah. This is really, saving lives or endangering lives, depending how it's used. So I think it's bigger. I think it's bigger than everything else.
I think it's bigger than pizza. I don't know. I don't know, Paulina, but I think you're right. I think the analogy would be if you had to have pizza, if you felt pizza was so delicious that you had to have it at least once a day, cold in the morning for breakfast, or lunch or dinner. So maybe twice a day. And then somebody would, people would say, well, when I have pizza, I already had it for lunch. Oh, okay. Did you have pizza for lunch? No. Oh, great. We'll have for dinner. And you're right. It's everywhere. It's, and it's just the beginning, probably. There is a temptation, like in everything, to assume that all trends continue forever, so that this particularly exponential leap in its capabilities will just get even more dazzling. And that may not be true, but it might be. Like you say, I wouldn't bet against it, and I wouldn't bet on it. So,
and I think, at some point it will become not even that exciting. It will become like a new thing, people will move on to something else. But I think it will stay. I just don't see how it can go back.
Yeah, you might be right. I want to close with, you mentioned driverless cars. I think everyone's had an experience, if you've ever used Google Maps or Waze to navigate in your car, all of a sudden you're on the wrong road. You've taken an exit ramp. There were a couple choices. You picked the wrong one. It thinks you're on the right one for a while, and you think you're okay. And then all of a sudden, to your horror, you realize you're on this other one that's veering off at a terrible angle. And you point out that for driverless cars, the level of it's amazing how accurate Google Maps is using it in your car or Waze. But with driverless cars, the accuracy has to be much more accurate. How are they doing that? And explain why that's important. It's kind of obvious, but maybe people haven't thought about it.
Yeah, so it is very important because the car has to. So imagine, when you're driving a car, you have to think about so many things. You have to think about the road where you're going. You have to think about, looking, also navigating all this like equipment, brakes and everything. You have to think, is there a child gonna jump out, on the road and I'm gonna have to brake fast? Like, what are the conditions? Like, is it raining? Do I have to slow down? Like, oh, there's an ambulance coming, so I have to stop or change lane. All these things, like it's one of the most extreme multitasking we do as human beings, I think. And you have a machine that has to do all that. Now, it's very helpful if the machine at least knows the road very well and also knows what to expect, so it can focus on the unexpected, right? So if it knows where exactly the road is, what it looks like, where the traffic lights are, etc., it can focus on the child jumping out potentially. So that's why it's so crucial for self-driving cars to have very, very accurate maps. By accurate, I mean it really needs to know where the curb is on the road. Now, just a caveat, I was writing it like 2-3 years ago, might have changed drastically since then. So because the technology keeps changing, and I know the cars with AI are getting more and more, they're more able to adjust to novelties. So they might need, I believe that in the future there'll be like, human drivers that they'll be okay with like going to a place they've never been before. But for now, self-driving cars are kind of mostly working in specific areas, specific cities when they know the city very well. So what happens if you have like cars that are really going road by road and mapping and taking pictures and their cameras and all this stuff to create this map. And there's also this kind of problem that you have, for example, self-driving car that's updating the map while it's using the map to drive further. So it's kind of like a loop. And it's, an interesting, complex problem to solve. So, and I mean, the self-driving cars are getting better and better. Like, they used to get completely, distracted by, I don't know, if they're driving, there's asphalt and then there's grass, they are just like, whoa, what is that? Now I don't think they're making these mistakes anymore. And so they are getting better than human drivers because people are not that great at driving, honestly. And even though many of us claim we are the best drivers in the world, but yeah. So I think that's the importance of these maps, to kind of help the car at least know what to expect. Again, I'm not an expert there, so if I said something very wrong, please leave a comment and yeah.
They'll let you know. But I'm curious. I assume this is a satellite problem to figure out where the curb is and the car itself. And I assume they've got Mercator. As a footnote to what you said, by the way, I took what I think was a driverless car. There wasn't a driver in it. There's some dispute about what kind of overrides companies can do. But when I was in San Francisco the last time, I took a driverless taxi a number of times, and I loved it. The first 30 seconds was a little bit frightening, but then you very quickly realize it's a much safer ride, at least in its current, again, if it's real, I don't know, but in its current manifestation than many human drivers that I've had in the past. So it was really quite a nice experience. But do you know how they're improving the accuracy of the visual representation that the cars are using?
So I'm not sure. I think what I imagine is it's a combination of better satellite images and kind of so the same way that, let's say, regular Google Maps are improving, and also the more cars there are, the more data is coming to improve. So if you have like hundreds and thousands of cars going the same road, they can be like, oh, this map is not exactly accurate, or I don't know, this is the spot where often bad things happen. I don't know this. So again, I'm not exactly sure. And I would imagine that every company has slightly different ways, but I think it's just with more data that's coming in. And yes, as you said, it's the self-driving cars actually feel a bit safer. And I think it is true also because they are much more risk averse. So if they're unsure, they'll slow down.
Yeah.
When people are like, I'm rushing, so you know what, like I'm not exactly sure if I can turn here, but I'm gonna do that anyway. So I think that's kind of the benefit of them. They don't have feelings, they don't have emotions, they don't get angry, they don't get tired, and I think that's the huge benefit of them.
Yeah, I agree. We didn't get to everything in your book. There are many, many other interesting chapters on Columbus, earthquakes, mapping the ocean floor. But let's close actually with the chapter that you wish you could have been twice as long. You know, I mentioned we didn't get to cholera and Jon Snow and the handle of the water pump, but what's your favorite? Do you have a favorite? Was there a chapter there that you fell in love with that you wish had been, you wanted to do it twice as long, but your editor said, yeah, you can't do this, Paulina, sorry.
I mean, there are a few. One is I would love to have more types of projections and kind of really look at the weird ones as well. And because, there are so many weird projections that are used for like one very particular thing. And I love that. I think this is beautiful. And another chapter is the one that you actually mentioned about mapping epidemics or mapping crime, kind of maps that really save lives. And this was a funny chapter because this is the chapter that my editor, who was always like, no, there's too much maps, like make it a bit simpler. And this one, she was like, wait, why didn't you put any maps? And it's like, no, this is all maps. And she was like, wait, but this is just like common sense. And this I found like the best thing I've heard about this book. So I talked about, how we can find things or people or the source of an epidemic by kind of using something that looks like common sense, but it's actually deep mathematics. And I loved reporting on this chapter because I had no idea about all these things about geographic profiling, so how we can narrow down the search for serial criminals. And I had lovely interviews, and I think I would love to write more, because this is the chapter when we really talk about life or death situations. And I think this really brings home the message that maps together are really important.
My guest today has been Paulina Rowinska. Her book is Mathematics. Paulina, thanks for being part of EconTalk.
Thank you.
This is EconTalk, part of the Library of Economics and Liberty. For more EconTalk, go to econtalk.org, where you can also comment on today's podcast and find links and readings related to today's conversation. The sound engineer for EconTalk is Rich Goyette. I'm your host, Russ Roberts. Thanks for listening. Talk to you on Monday.